I'll never forget the sound that glass made when it hit the floor. A sharp, almost musical ting, followed by silence, then screaming. The kind of screaming that doesn't stop after a second. The kind that tightens your chest, makes time slow down. The kind that tells you something has gone horribly, irreversibly wrong. Helen. My daughter-in-law's mother was on the floor, her limbs seizing, white foam bubbling at the corners of her mouth. Her champagne flute lay shattered beside her, droplets of the golden liquid soaking into the rug. People were frozen in place, gasping, hands covering their mouths. Someone knocked over a chair, scrambling for their phone, and all I could think was, that drink was meant for me. It's a strange thing, realizing in real time that someone wants you dead. You'd think fear would take over, that you'd scream, panic, collapse, but I didn't. I watched, I listened, I waited. Because after 70 years on this earth, and 45 of those spent surviving the cutthroat world of corporate consulting, I've learned one thing with absolute certainty. Sometimes the best way to catch a snake is to let it think it's about to strike. And this snake? She was family. Just a couple of hours earlier, my kitchen had been full of laughter. The scent of citrus and fresh flowers, sparkling wine and fluted glasses, the kind of music you only play when you're pretending everything's perfect. I had just signed the final documents sold the company I built from nothing for $23 million. My life's work, all tied up in a tidy wire transfer and a box of sentimental goodbyes. Friends, former colleagues, neighbors, they all came to celebrate. My son, Michael, had insisted on throwing the party. "Mom, you have to let us do this." "You deserve a celebration," he'd said, his eyes soft and sincere. The same eyes I used to see peek out from under a Batman mask when he was 5. And Jessica, his wife, my daughter-in-law, was suddenly the picture of the perfect hostess, organizing the catering, arranging flowers, making toasts. This from the woman who once told me arranging takeout containers was too much work. At first I thought maybe she was trying to make a good impression. Maybe she was finally learning how to be gracious. But something felt off. A little too perfect. A little too polished, and way too eager to keep me seated, relaxed, distracted. Funny how hindsight doesn't need glasses. There was a champagne glass at that party one with a tiny chip near the rim. It was my favorite. I'd used it at every celebration for over a decade. No one else ever touched it because no one else ever noticed the chip. But I noticed something that night. Jessica hovering near the drinks table, glancing around like a teenager trying to sneak vodka into a soda bottle. Her hand slipped into her purse and pulled out something small. Glass, maybe, a vial. A few drops of something thick and amber-colored disappeared into my glass. I felt my pulse slow, not quick and slow, because fear wasn't what came next. What came next was the sharp, cold clarity of decades of experience, of boardrooms filled with smiling liars, of contracts written in invisible ink, of betrayal not from enemies, but from people you once trusted with your future. I knew in that moment, with more certainty than I'd ever known anything, that Jessica wanted me dead. And if I reacted, if I gasped, if I reached for her wrist, if I made a scene, I would never know how far her plan went. Who else was involved? How long they'd been waiting for their payday. So I did what I've always done best. I played the long game. I smiled, accepted the glass, and waited. Now, if you're still here listening, you're probably wondering why I didn't just call the police, why I didn't confront her in front of the whole room, why I let that moment pass with nothing but a smile. Let me tell you something. In business, you don't win by having the loudest voice. You win by letting the other person think they're in control right up until the moment they realize they've been walking into your trap the entire time. And Jessica, she had no idea that I saw everything. She handed me the poison glass like she was giving me a gift, said I looked tired, said I should relax, said I deserved it. She wasn't wrong. I did deserve something, just not what she was hoping I'd get. And as the music swelled and the room erupted in laughter again, I quietly stepped out of her story and into my own plan. A plan that would change everything. Because this wasn't just a party, it was an ambush. But not for me. For them. Some people say that age makes you slow. They've clearly never sat across a negotiation table from a woman who's survived the kind of business world I've lived through. Let me tell you something. I didn't build a multi-million-dollar consulting firm by being soft, or by assuming the best in everyone. I learned, painfully and thoroughly, that smiles lie, that handshakes can be weapons, that family dinners and boardroom deals often taste the same until someone tries to slip something bitter into your glass. So when Jessica tried to poison me, I didn't panic because I wasn't surprised. I saw it coming, not the how but the why. That had been brewing for years. It started, like most betrayals do, with little things. The way Jessica flinched when I offered to pay Emma's private school tuition, but never offered to chip in herself. The way she always seemed resentful when I gave Michael gifts, as if she were mentally calculating how much closer it brought them to my money. And the way she smiled through her teeth every Christmas, every birthday, every time I came over for dinner, never quite looking me in the eye. See, most people think poisoners are obvious villains, that they cackle and stir potions. But real-life murderers look a lot more like PTA moms and lifestyle influencers, manicured, composed, and quietly calculating. Jessica was no exception. I suppose I should have seen the red flags earlier, but when you're a mother and then a grandmother, you learn to overlook a lot. You make excuses. You tell yourself, maybe she's just stressed. Maybe she's tired. Maybe I'm overthinking it. And maybe I was at first, but when someone goes from barely lifting a finger around the house to suddenly organizing an elaborate retirement party with floral centerpieces and champagne flutes arranged by glass size, you pay attention. Especially when that someone once said, "Cleaning is for people who don't have better things to do." I'd learned to observe people long before I ever had a boardroom. Back in the early days when I was a widowed mom of one, trying to convince skeptical clients that I could rebuild their companies better than the men who'd run them into the ground, I didn't have the luxury of trusting anyone. I watched body language, micro-expressions, pauses. People told you everything you needed to know. You just had to be quiet long enough to hear it. That habit never left me, and thank God for that. Because when Jessica poured that liquid into my glass, the one with the tiny chip near the rim that only I ever used, I caught the way her hand trembled. Just slightly, barely perceptible to the average guest, but not to me. When you've negotiated hostile takeovers with billionaires, a shaky hand stands out like a foghorn. I watched her eyes scan the room, watched her locate me from across the kitchen and smile like we shared a secret. We did, just not the one she thought. That was the moment I knew for sure. The moment instinct honed over decades of professional survival screamed, "This isn't care, this is calculation." And that's when everything clicked into place. You see, when you've spent years surrounded by power-hungry men who'd gut you for a promotion, you develop an intuition. You know when you're being played, and more importantly, you learn when to play back. Jessica thought she had the upper hand. She thought I was old, sentimental, distracted by my own success. She forgot who she married into. I may be 70, but I've outmaneuvered men twice her size and 5 times her IQ, so I let her think she'd won. I smiled. I took the glass, but I didn't drink it. Not yet. Instead, I let her bask in her false victory. I let her show me fake concern. I even let her squeeze my arm like we were best friends. Because the moment she believed she had me, that was the moment she became vulnerable. That's when she stopped being careful. That's when I started my real work. People say retirement is when you rest, when you stop working, when you finally relax. But for me, retirement was when I stopped pretending. For the first time in years, I didn't have to play the role of CEO, mentor, or consultant. I got to be exactly who I am, a mother, a survivor, and now, a a strategist with nothing to lose. You don't live through decades of corporate warfare and walk away soft. You walk away sharp. And when someone tries to bury you at your own party, no less, you don't just survive. You investigate. And then you strike back. But not out of rage. No. Out of precision. Because the best revenge isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's silent. Just like the poison in that champagne glass, except this time, it wasn't me who drank it. You'd think a retirement party would be filled with joy, right? Laughter, memories, maybe a few tears from old coworkers wishing you well, clinking glasses, inside jokes, warm hugs, something sweet, something earned. And for the most part, it was, at least on the surface. But if you looked closely, if you watched the way I did, you'd see something else hiding beneath the glittering veneer. Tension, tight smiles, glances that lasted a second too long. And Jessica, moving through the crowd like a shark in heels. This party wasn't just a celebration, it was a setup. And I was the target. Michael had gone all out. He wanted everything to be perfect. Or maybe he wanted me to think everything was perfect. I just want to show you how proud we are of you, he said earlier that week, placing his hand on mine. You've done so much. You deserve this. The sincerity in his voice would have melted anyone, but to me, it felt off. Maybe it was the way he avoided eye contact a second too long, or how he immediately followed up with, Jessica's handling all the details. She's amazing at this kind of thing. That was my first red flag. Jessica? Amazing at parties? This was the same woman who once forgot to RSVP to her own sister's wedding, but suddenly she was everywhere, ordering custom floral arrangements, color coordinating the napkins with the champagne labels, interviewing bartenders like she was running a Michelin-starred restaurant. At first, I chalked it up to image. Maybe she wanted to impress the people I'd worked with. Maybe this was just her way of stepping into the spotlight. But when I saw her personally hand paint the place cards, I knew something was wrong. Jessica didn't do things for free. She didn't go the extra mile unless there was a prize waiting at the finish line. And this time, the prize was me. There were 32 guests at the party. Friends, former clients, old neighbors, people I hadn't seen in years. Jessica made sure everyone had a full glass, a full plate, and a full view of me smiling at the center of it all. But while everyone else was toasting my career, Jessica was calculating. She kept watching me. Not warmly, not fondly, but like she was waiting for something, like she was timing it. That's when I started watching her back. I positioned myself near the kitchen entrance, close enough to keep an eye on the drinks table. That's when I saw her do it. It was fast, casual, the kind of motion that wouldn't draw attention unless you were really looking. Her hand slipped into her purse, came out with a small glass vial, colorless, glossy, tightly capped. She looked around, once, twice, then uncapped it and tilted it ever so slightly over a champagne flute. My champagne flute. The one with the tiny chip on the rim that only I used, the one everyone knew was Mom's glass, the one sitting at the exact spot I'd been standing earlier next to the congratulatory gift Michael said they'd gotten engraved. She poured, swirled, smiled to herself, then walked away like nothing happened. I stood there for a full minute, replaying what I just saw. Some people would have screamed. Grabbed the glass, called 911. But I wasn't some people. I was Sarah Wilson, and I'd played this game before, just not with family. So I took a breath, composed myself, and returned to the party like nothing happened. I made small talk, accepted compliments, thanked old colleagues, and then I waited. 10 minutes later, Jessica reappeared. Sarah, she said, holding the glass like it was a peace offering, you look a little tired. Sit down, have a drink. She handed it to me, her expression soft, sweet, maternal almost. That was the performance. But behind her eyes, I saw it. That flicker of anticipation. I accepted the glass, held it gently in my hand, even gave a little nod of thanks, but I didn't drink it. Not yet. Because here's the thing Jessica didn't count on. I've been setting traps longer than she's been alive. And if she wanted to see me fall, if she thought this party was my finale, then she clearly didn't know how finales work. In a finale, secrets are revealed. Masks come off. And someone always ends up losing everything. So while she floated around the party playing the doting daughter-in-law, I was watching her hover too long over the gift table, watching Michael nervously text someone every 10 minutes, watching them both cast glances at me like they were waiting for a domino to fall. They thought it would be tonight. They thought I'd drink, collapse, and be gone. But instead, I switched the glasses, and the game began. They say your life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die. But for me, the moment I held that poisoned glass in my hand, what flashed before my eyes was my plan. Because this wasn't going to be the end of my story. Number. This was the beginning of theirs. The beginning of the unraveling, the fallout, the justice. Jessica thought she had played the final move, but what she didn't know is that I hadn't even started playing mine. I held the flute delicately, letting the bubbles rise to the surface. The champagne sparkled in the warm light of the chandelier, just like it always did. From across the room, Jessica watched me with an expression she thought was unreadable. But I've seen that look before, in corporate takeovers, in boardroom betrayals, that faint, barely contained eagerness like someone waiting for a deal to close that they know they shouldn't have gotten away with. And in that moment, she wasn't just my daughter-in-law. She was a rookie poker player holding a losing hand and smiling anyway. I walked slowly through the crowd, the glass still in hand, making my way toward the woman who would unknowingly save my life. Helen, Jessica's mother. She was standing near the staircase, looking just slightly out of place, dressed in her best jewelry, holding an empty glass, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Helen had always been a bit absent-minded, sweet but scattered. The kind of person who forgets where she parked or what she came into a room for. She wasn't the type to question things, especially not in a room this busy, this loud. She just wanted to feel included. So when I reached her, I smiled and said, "Helen, you don't have a drink." "Let me fix that." And I gently set Jessica's glass, my glass, on the table beside her. She smiled, thanked me, and, just as I expected, picked it up without a second thought. What happened next wasn't part of the plan, but I knew as soon as she brought that glass to her lips and took a slow sip, it was only a matter of time. Minutes, maybe. I turned back toward the living room, rejoining my guests. My heart thudded in my chest, not from fear, but from the weight of certainty, because now I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew. 5 minutes later, Helen began coughing. Not polite, dry throat coughing, not someone tell a joke coughing, but deep, racking coughs. Her face turned pale, then flushed, her knees buckled, and then she collapsed. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the tile like a gunshot in a church. All noise stopped, then chaos. Jessica screamed, loud, dramatic. She dropped to her knees beside her mother, shaking her, wailing, "Mom, oh my God, someone call 911. Someone did, someone always does." But I wasn't looking at Helen anymore. I was watching Jessica, and what I saw wasn't grief. It was panic, real panic. The kind that doesn't come from worry, but from recognition. Recognition that something had gone very wrong. I dropped to my knees too, but not for theatrics. I had to see it up close. The froth at Helen's lips, the slight blue tinge in her fingernails. I'd seen this kind of poisoning before, during a client scandal in the early 2000s. The symptoms were textbook. Jessica had done her homework. She just didn't expect to poison her own mother. Michael burst through the circle of guests a minute later, face pale as snow. "What happened?" he asked, eyes darting between Helen and Jessica. "What's going on?" "She just collapsed," Jessica sobbed, clutching my arm. "She was fine 1 minute, and then she She gestured helplessly, her mascara beginning to smear. But I wasn't looking at her mascara. I was looking at Michael, and what I saw on his face wasn't shock. It was recognition and guilt, a flicker of something dark and heavy. He knew something, maybe not the full picture, maybe not the poison, but something. The paramedics arrived quickly. As they loaded Helen onto a stretcher, I could feel Jessica's eyes flicking to me again and again, searching, wondering, did I drink it? Am I next? And the more she wondered, the quieter I became. Because silence, my dear, is where the most dangerous thoughts live. As the ambulance doors closed, I turned to Michael and Jessica. "I'm going to the hospital," I said. Michael stepped forward too quickly. "No, Mom, let us handle it." "You should stay here. You've been through a lot," I looked at him, eyes steady. "Helen is practically family." "I'm going." I didn't wait for permission. I just walked away because the next phase of my plan was already in motion. The ride to the hospital wasn't long, but it felt like forever. Not because I was worried about Helen, though I truly hoped she'd survive. It felt long because I couldn't stop replaying Jessica's face in my mind. That look, that awful confused look, like someone who had pulled the trigger and hit the wrong person, like a child who set a trap only to find herself tangled in it. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't prepared for this. And now her performance was falling apart faster than the bubbles in a warm champagne glass. At the hospital, I didn't let the staff shuffle me into the waiting room like a passive observer. No, I stayed close. Not enough to interfere, but enough to listen, enough to see. The doctors moved quickly. Monitors beeped. Nurses whispered. They wheeled Helen into the ER, and within minutes, words began floating back to the front desk. Unstable vitals, acute reaction, and then, most importantly, toxic exposure unknown plant compound, possibly an alkaloid plant-based poison. Not food poisoning, not a medication mix-up, but something far more deliberate. That confirmed it. Jessica hadn't just wanted me gone. She wanted me erased. When Jessica and Michael arrived 20 minutes later, they were a study in contrast. Jessica was pacing the linoleum floor like a metronome on overdrive heels, clacking with every step, arms crossed too tightly. Michael sat rigid, hunched over his phone, ignoring the constant vibrations from his pocket. I said nothing. Instead, I watched. People underestimate silence, but silence makes people nervous. It forces them to fill the space with words they didn't plan to say. And Jessica? She started talking. "This is just terrible," she said for the 5th time. Her voice was trembling, but not with grief, with fear. "I just don't understand how this happened." She was fine when we left the house. "Do you think it was something in the food?" I tilted my head. Maybe. Or maybe it was the champagne. She said it tasted odd, bitter even. Asked me if I ordered it from somewhere special. Jessica blinked, then froze. "Champagne," she repeated, a little too sharply. I nodded. Yes, though she only had a few sips before she collapsed, thank goodness. Jessica's mouth opened, then shut. Her face went a full shade paler. Michael, to his credit, said nothing, but he was watching both of us, his eyes darting between our faces like a spectator at a tennis match. I patted Jessica's shoulder gently. "I'm sure it was just a strange coincidence," I said sweetly. "These things happen." But her hands were shaking. 3 hours passed before a doctor emerged. Helen was stable, sedated, out of danger for now, but the tests, inconclusive. Whatever she ingested was working its way out of her system, slowly, quietly. And if it had been even a little more potent, she might not have made it. Jessica asked if she could see her mother. "Family only," the doctor replied, "and she's not conscious. Best to come back tomorrow." We all nodded politely, but I noticed the flicker of relief that crossed Jessica's face, because a sedated mother, can't speak, can't remember, can't identify the wrong glass. As we left the hospital, Michael walked me to my car. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice low. That was a lot. He looked concerned, genuinely concerned. And if I hadn't known better, if I hadn't seen what I'd seen, I might have believed him. I really might have. But I knew better. Because kindness offered too late isn't kindness at all. It's strategy. "Maybe you should come stay with us tonight," Michael added. "Just for a night. I'd feel better if you weren't alone after everything I smiled. How thoughtful. But I'm perfectly fine. You sure? You don't have to be strong, Mom. After what happened, it's okay to need support. Support or surveillance. Because now the plan had gone sideways, and they needed time to regroup, to figure out what I saw, what I knew, and what I might do next. They wanted me close, contained, controlled. But I didn't spend decades building a life alone just to hand it over under the guise of comfort. "No, dear," I said. "I have that new security system, remember? I'll be just fine." He hesitated, then nodded, and I kissed him on the cheek like the mother I used to be before any of this, before I became their target, before they became my suspects. And as I got into my car, I watched in the rearview mirror as Michael and Jessica stood by theirs talking. No arguing. She was gesturing wildly. He kept trying to grab her arm, calm her down. And that's when it hit me. They weren't just worried about what had gone wrong. They were panicking about what I might do next, and they were right to worry, because that night I didn't pour myself a glass of wine and cry into it. I didn't call a friend or scroll social media. Number. I sat in my study with a fresh legal pad, a black pen, and one question burning in my mind. What do they want? And how far will they go to get it? And by sunrise? I had the beginnings of an answer. By sunrise, I had brewed a fresh pot of coffee, pulled out my checkbook records, and surrounded myself with silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from peace, but the kind that comes when you realize you've been living in a house of mirrors, and all the reflections you thought were real were nothing but tricks. I knew Jessica didn't act alone. That much was clear. She didn't know about the chipped glass. She didn't know that I always kept it for myself at parties. No, someone told her. Someone who had seen me use it 100 times before. Someone like Michael. My son. My only child. The person I loved most in this world, and the person who, just the night before, offered to tuck me safely under his roof like a wounded bird. But if he was innocent, why was he so quick to suggest I stay with them? Why did he try to keep me from going to the hospital? Why did he look at Jessica, not Helen, when everything started falling apart? I started digging, not online, not through emails or texts. That would come later. No, this kind of digging required something older. Memory, instinct, and every red flag I had ever ignored. Michael's architecture firm had been struggling for years. He told me it was the market, COVID, construction delays, labor shortages, all the usual excuses. But the truth? He'd never been a businessman. He was talented, yes, but he didn't understand cash flow. He didn't know how to say no to luxury clients who wanted everything and paid nothing. I had bailed him out more than once. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Nothing big. Just help. But when I added it all up over the last 5 years, it totaled nearly $200,000. Down payment on their house, temporary assistance with payroll, a new furnace they couldn't afford when Emma was born. And then there was Jessica's boutique jewelry business, a glamorous little storefront in a fancy shopping district that bled more money than it made. She called it her passion. I called it a money pit, but I kept writing the checks because I thought I was being generous, because I believed they were trying, because I was their mother. But now, those checks looked different. Now they weren't gifts. They were investments in a lie, or worse, advanced payments on a murder. I looked around my kitchen, marble counters, stainless steel appliances, the same floors Helen had collapsed on just hours ago. And I asked myself something terrifying. What if this had worked? What if I had actually drank that glass? What would they have told people? That I had a heart attack? A stroke? At 70, no one would have questioned it. She just sold her business. It was too much stress. She was always so strong. We never saw it coming. And then what? A quiet funeral, a generous inheritance, and no suspicion. It would have been perfect. Except for one thing. They underestimated the very thing that built my empire. Me. My phone buzzed at 7:30 a.m. Jessica. Her voice was syrupy, sweet, artificial, like store-bought frosting. Sarah, I couldn't sleep all night. I just kept thinking about you. Are you okay? After what happened to Mom? I mean, what if it was something from the party? Something in the food? You didn't feel sick, did you? There it was. The slip. The panic behind the politeness. She wasn't checking on me. She was checking if the poison had worked. I smiled as I stirred my coffee. Not at all, dear. I feel just fine. Have you heard anything more about Helen? Oh, yes, she should be home today. The doctors think it might have been, I don't know. Maybe something she ate earlier. You know how she is with her medications. That was a lie. Helen kept her medications in color-coded containers. She had daily reminders set on her phone. That woman could out-organize a military general. But Jessica was counting on chaos, confusion, memory gaps. A sedated mother was the perfect shield. Too bad I wasn't. After we hung up, I walked back to the champagne bottle still sitting on my counter, 3/4 full, still sealed with Jessica's tidy little ribbon. It sat there innocently, like a leftover memory from a beautiful evening. But I knew better. That bottle was a crime scene, and I made a mental note. Get it tested. Quietly. Because I didn't need proof for myself anymore. I needed it for the police. And for the first time in decades, I felt something strange. Not anger, not fear, not even betrayal, but clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you stop giving people the benefit of the doubt and start giving yourself the benefit of the truth. They wanted my money. They wanted my house. They wanted my freedom, and they almost got it. But almost only counts in horseshoes. The thing about betrayal is, once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. It becomes the lens through which everything is re-examined. Every smile, every favor, every seemingly innocent gesture. Everything starts to look strategic. That's what ran through my mind as I sat in my study that night, pen in hand, legal pad open, my house silent except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. This was no longer about feelings. This was war. And wars aren't won with emotion. They're won with strategy. I started with what I knew. Fact, Jessica poisoned a glass of champagne meant for me. Fact, Helen, her mother, drank it instead and nearly died. Fact, Jessica had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. And fact, Michael was either complicit or criminally naive. I didn't have evidence yet, but I had instincts. And after 45 years of building a business in a world dominated by men who smiled while planning your downfall, I had learned to trust those instincts more than I trusted people. So I went to work, not on a computer, not through emails or social media. No, this kind of work needed something older, slower, more precise, memory, paper, history. I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out old financial records. Bank transfers, checkbook ledgers, notes from conversations with Michael about temporary help and just until things stabilize. I laid them out on the desk in a timeline. And what I saw was a pattern, not of need, but of expectation. Jessica and Michael weren't asking for help. They were budgeting for it. They had built their life assuming I'd always bail them out. And now that I had sold my company, the payday they were waiting for had finally arrived, only I was still alive, still independent, still inconvenient. I thought about the champagne. about how Jessica had picked the one glass with the chip. She couldn't have known that detail, but Michael did. He'd poured my drinks at every holiday gathering for years. He'd teased me once about refusing to get rid of that old glass. "It's just a cup, Mom." "No," I'd said. "It's tradition." That's when I knew. He'd told her. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to target me precisely. Enough to make her confident. Too confident. At 2:15 a.m., I called someone I hadn't spoken to in almost a decade, David Hartwell. My attorney. He'd helped me draft my first company bylaws when I was still operating out of my garage. A brilliant man, cautious, loyal, and with the right motivation, relentlessly thorough. He picked up on the third ring, groggy but alert. "Sarah? Everything okay?" "No," I said calmly, "but I'm about to make it okay. I need to meet." "Soon? You sound serious." "I am." "What's this about?" "My son, my daughter-in-law, and a glass of champagne." We scheduled a meeting for the next morning. In the meantime, I sat down and did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote down everything, not just facts, not just numbers, but feelings, moments that had felt off, statements Jessica had made in passing that now carried weight, things Michael didn't say during the hospital visit, the absence of true panic in his voice, and more importantly, I wrote down what I planned to do. Because if this was a game of chess, then it was time to take my queen out of hiding. I couldn't confront them, not yet. If I moved too early, they'd hide the evidence, delete messages, tighten their stories, number. This needed to be quiet, legal, irrefutable. So I made a checklist. Confirm the poison, get the champagne bottle tested. Lock down my estate, redraft my will, and restructure my trust. Limit their access, remove Michael as power of attorney, and freeze any accounts they could touch. Document my sanity. Get a professional evaluation to shut down any mental incompetency angle they might try. Dig deeper. Find out just how far they were willing to go. And for that last one, I needed a different kind of expert. I picked up my phone again, and this time, I called someone I'd only worked with once, years ago, when I suspected a business partner was embezzling funds. Her name was Patricia Williams, private investigator, smart, discreet, and brutally effective. I left a message, "It's Sarah Wilson. I need help. This time, it's personal." By the time dawn broke, I wasn't scared anymore. I was focused. Because when people try to bury you, they don't expect you to dig yourself out, and they certainly don't expect you to come back with a shovel of your own. The next morning, Patricia Williams called me back. Her voice was brisk, professional, no small talk. "Sarah, I got your message." "You said this one's personal?" "Yes," I replied, "very." "Then you'll get my best team." I told her what I needed. Full financial backgrounds on Michael and Jessica, any joint accounts, private loans, credit card statements, real estate records, and if possible, any life insurance policies with my name on them. There was a pause. "Do I want to know why?" "You probably don't," I said, "but you'll find out soon enough." She gave me a timeline. 48 hours for a deep scan. I didn't have to wait that long. The first results arrived that night, and they were worse than I ever imagined. Patricia emailed me a full PDF report titled Financial Risk Assessment, Hartwell Household. I opened it in my study, wine in hand, bracing myself. I didn't brace hard enough. Page 1, the mortgage. Michael and Jessica had refinanced their home 3 times in the last 5 years. They were now underwater, meaning they owed more than the house was worth. They had 2 primary mortgages, a home equity line of credit, and were more than 90 days late on their last payment. Then came the credit cards. Over $83,000 in revolving debt, most of it at high interest. Monthly payments exceeding $2,200. Multiple cards maxed out. Jessica had used a personal shopping concierge service, charged $4,000 in a single month on handbags and client-facing fashion. Client-facing what exactly? She barely had a real client. But the worst was yet to come. Michael had secretly withdrawn $50,000 from his business account using a personal loan co-signed by Jessica Wright after I sold my company. Patricia added a note, "Funds unaccounted for," possibly used to cover overdue business expenses or personal liabilities. But the real punch came on page 12, a life insurance policy taken out 6 months ago, value $500,000. Policyholder, me. Beneficiary, Jessica Hartwell. I stared at the page in disbelief. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't even heard about it. So how was this legal? Patricia's note explained, Jessica listed herself as a caregiver and family member, which can, under specific circumstances, qualify her for an insurable interest. Caregiver? She barely remembered to send flowers on my birthday, but now she had a $500,000 reason for me to disappear quietly. I set the wine glass down carefully. Then I stood, walked to the kitchen, and stared at the champagne bottle still on my counter, 3/4 full, unopened since the party, still a silent witness to a crime, still laced, likely, with the same toxin that nearly killed Helen, oleander maybe, or another plant-based compound, untraceable in low doses, only fatal if consumed in the right amount, and Jessica had measured it out, prepared the dosage, smiled as she handed it to me. I turned back to Patricia's report. The final pages detailed something else entirely. Michael had been making monthly payments, small, discreet, to a man named Dr. Richard Steinberg, a geriatric psychiatrist, a specialist in competency evaluations for elderly patients. Patricia flagged it. Unusual pattern. Payments began 3 months ago, maybe connected to legal attempts to declare cognitive decline. My stomach dropped. They weren't just planning to inherit my wealth, they were preparing to take it while I was still alive, use the poison as a trigger, then follow it with a psychiatric evaluation, claim I was confused, paranoid, unstable, then quietly shuffle me into a luxury senior facility with high walls and limited access to lawyers, while they managed my accounts, while they transferred my assets, while I faded slowly, conveniently, under professional care. It was brilliant, cruel, but brilliant. Jessica and Michael had built an entire scaffolding of control. The concerned suggestions about moving in with them. The nursing home pamphlet left on my kitchen counter. The power of attorney papers they'd casually mentioned. The private conversations I wasn't supposed to overhear. The way they'd carefully chipped away at my independence while cloaking it in love. It wasn't about greed anymore. It was about control, and I would have walked right into it, if not for one mistake. Jessica didn't wait long enough. She poured the poison too soon, and she handed it to the wrong woman. By the time I closed the report, my hands were steady. Not because I wasn't shaken, but because I was no longer afraid. Because now, I had everything I needed. Motive, means, evidence, witness, if Helen remembered, and a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to their carefully constructed trap. Except I wasn't trapped anymore. They were. They came over the next morning, bright and early. Michael carried a box of pastries from my favorite bakery. Jessica wore a cozy cardigan and brought coffee. Just the way you like it, Sarah. Their smiles were warm. Too warm. And I knew exactly what this was. The next phase of the plan. I played along, of course. Let them sit in my kitchen like loving family. Let them pour coffee and offer me cherry danishes. Let them talk, slowly, gently, as if preparing me for some inevitable truth I couldn't possibly understand on my own. "Mom," Michael said, sliding a pamphlet across the table, "we've been thinking..." Here it was. I picked up the glossy folder and read the name aloud. Sunset Manor. Jessica leaned forward. "It's not a nursing home, Sarah. It's a retirement community." "Ah, of course. The rebranding of control. Polished, pastel-colored marketing for places that lock you in with smiles and spa packages. They have a golf course," she said. "Art classes, a wellness center. You'd love it," Michael chimed in. "And it's only 20 minutes from us, so we could visit all the time." Right. Visit. When they wanted to. If they wanted to. I let them talk. They described social enrichment, on-site medical care, peace of mind. Then came the line I'd been waiting for. Michael, lowering his voice like he was delivering a diagnosis. "You're 70 now, Mom. Living alone, managing all that money." He gestured vaguely toward my home, my bank account, my independence. "It's just a lot." Jessica jumped in, eyes wide with faux concern. "And after what happened to my mom, well, what if that had been you? What if no one had found you in time?" The irony was suffocating. I smiled gently. "I appreciate your concern." Michael reached into his bag and pulled out a manila folder. Inside, printed forms, legal documents, and a typed-out checklist labeled Next Steps. "I went ahead and got all the paperwork from Sunset Manor," he said. "They do have a waiting list, but there's an open unit if we act fast." He tapped one page. "There's a $400,000 entrance fee, but it covers everything: housing, meals, health care." For life, I took the paper and pretended to read, but I already knew what it said. Patricia had gotten a copy the night before, downloaded from their shared email account. It wasn't just a contract, it was a transfer of control. Jessica slid another document toward me. "This one's the power of attorney form," she said. "Casual, so casual. It just gives Michael authority to help with financial stuff in case you can't." I read it carefully. It was anything but casual. It granted full access to all accounts, assets, and legal decisions. No oversight, no expiration. With one signature, Michael would own me. I set the papers down. "This all seems very thorough," I said. Michael nodded. "We just want to make sure you're protected." I looked him in the eyes. The boy I'd raised. The man who once built Lego cities on this very table. The man who now wanted to ship me off, manage my fortune, and call it care. Out of curiosity, I asked, "What if I changed my mind after moving in?" Jessica answered too quickly. "Well, technically, you could leave, but they have medical evaluations and protocols for residents who want to move out. It's complicated." There it was, the cage, lined with silk sheets and watercolor art, but a cage nonetheless. I stood up slowly, taking the folder with me. "Let me think about it," I said. "This is a big decision." Michael exhaled with relief. "Of course. Take all the time you need." "But not too long," Jessica added, trying to sound cheerful. "They won't hold the spot forever." No, I thought, but I would. After they left, I sat in my study and opened the documents again, this time not as their mother, but as the CEO I used to be. The clauses were clear. Once admitted to Sunset Manor, I'd be under full observation. If I showed any signs of confusion or cognitive instability, I could be deemed unfit to manage my affairs. And guess who was already making quiet payments to a geriatric psychiatrist? Michael. I picked up the phone and called David Hartwell, my attorney. "David, it's time." For everything. They thought they were being smart, strategic, subtle. But they forgot who taught them strategy in the first place. They forgot who built her life from ashes, who turned grief into a $23 million empire. And most importantly, they forgot that a woman who survives long enough to retire doesn't just give her life away. You have to take it. And I wasn't about to let them. David Hartwell's office hadn't changed much in 20 years. Dark mahogany bookshelves, thick carpets that muffled your steps, a subtle scent of leather and expensive cologne. Everything in that room screamed stability, which is exactly what I needed. He greeted me with the same firm handshake he'd used the day I signed the founding papers for my consulting firm. Back then, I was a widowed 40-year-old mother with nothing but a laptop and a will of steel. He believed in me before most people even remembered my name. That's why I called him. Because now, I needed someone who could turn that steel into armor. We sat down. His assistant brought coffee, closed the door, and disappeared with the kind of silence only a good legal secretary can master. "All right, Sarah," he said, flipping open his notepad. "Tell me everything." So I did. Every detail. The party, the glass, Helen's collapse, Jessica's performance, the power of attorney documents, the Sunset Manor contract, Michael's odd glances, Jessica's desperate phone calls, Patricia's investigation, the life insurance policy, the payments to Dr. Steinberg. I spoke calmly, clearly, like I was delivering a quarterly report, because that's what this was now, a hostile takeover of my life, and I wasn't about to let it happen. When I finished, David sat back, hands steepled, brow furrowed. "You're certain Jessica was trying to poison you?" I met his eyes. "As certain as I am that I'm sitting in this chair." He nodded slowly. "And the champagne bottle is still in your possession?" "In my kitchen," I said, untouched. "And Helen?" "Stable, sedated. Doesn't remember the party yet, but I suspect she will." David tapped his pen on his pad. "Sarah, I believe you, but we need more than belief to stop them legally." "I know," I said, "and that's why I came prepared." I handed him the printed report Patricia had sent. He skimmed it quickly, stopping at the highlighted sections. The $500,000 life insurance policy, the extensive debts, the secret payments to the psychiatrist, the Sunset Manor documents pre-filled with my financial data. He whistled low. "Well," he said, "they've been planning this for a while." "Yes," I said coldly. "They just got sloppy at the end." "Your signature's not on anything yet?" "Not the real versions." "They gave me papers to sign last week. I told them I'd think about it." David smiled. "Good. That gives us time." We spent the next 2 hours building a counterattack. First, secure my finances. David began drafting a new trust structure, one they couldn't access or challenge. Every account would be placed under a layered system requiring dual approvals for withdrawals, automatic fraud alerts, and third-party oversight. Second, update my will. Michael was removed as primary beneficiary. Instead, I set up a modest trust, $50,000 per year, conditional on good behavior. If he contested the will or was convicted of any crime against me, the trust would dissolve immediately. Jessica? Nothing. Not a penny. Third, document my competency. This was crucial. David arranged for an independent evaluation by a court-recognized geriatric psychiatrist, not Dr. Steinberg. We scheduled the appointment for later that week. The report would be notarized, filed, and sent to the court system as preemptive defense. If they tried to claim I was losing my mind, I'd already have the medical receipts that proved otherwise. Fourth, protect my person. We contacted a private security firm. By the next morning, my home would be outfitted with discrete security cameras, motion-activated lighting, a panic button system that connected directly to local police, and a 24-hour response team on call. When the installers arrived, I told the neighbors I'd had a package stolen. Harmless. Plausible. They nodded in sympathy. By the time I left David's office that afternoon, my entire life had been rewritten on paper, in ink, and with steel in its bones. And for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Because now, I wasn't guessing. I was acting. That night, I poured a fresh glass of wine not from the party bottle and sat on my back deck. The roses in the garden were blooming, my late husband's favorites. For years, I'd kept this house warm for family, for holidays, for memories, for togetherness. And now, I was defending it like a fortress, because it turns out the most dangerous people aren't the ones who break in. They're the ones you leave a key for. They arrived right on time. Michael in a button-down and slacks, Jessica in a pastel dress that looked like it had been carefully chosen to suggest innocence. Neither of them smiled. This wasn't a social call. This was a closing meeting, only they didn't realize who was closing what. I welcomed them in, as if nothing had changed. Jessica sat rigid on the couch, purse clutched in her lap. Michael hovered, pacing near the fireplace. Both of them tense, but trying so hard to seem relaxed. "Have you had time to think things over, Mom?" Michael asked. I nodded. "Yes," I said smoothly, "and I've decided it's time." Jessica's eyes lit up. "Time? To take the next step," I said. "You're right. I should secure my future. I should be somewhere safe with people I trust." They both exhaled like children finally allowed to unwrap their gifts. Michael reached into his bag. "Great. I brought the Sunset Manor forms. If we get these submitted by tomorrow—" "I already signed them," I said, cutting him off. Jessica blinked. "You did?" "Yes. I had them notarized this morning." She reached for her purse with a tremble of excitement, probably to check the insurance timing, probably already planning how soon she could cash out what she thought was her prize. "And the power of attorney form?" Michael asked. I handed him a thick envelope. "Everything you need is inside." They opened the packet together, and for a moment, they really believed it. I could see it in their faces, that wave of relief, of greed disguised as gratitude. Jessica even squeezed Michael's hand. But then Michael frowned, flipped a page, flipped another, and froze. "What is this?" he asked, voice flat. Jessica looked over his shoulder. This doesn't give you access to her main accounts." Her voice was tight now, shrill. "This says you only have authority over a limited account." I smiled. "That's correct. A checking account with exactly $1 in it." Jessica stood up. "What kind of game is this?" she snapped. I didn't flinch. "The kind where I stop pretending I don't know what you're doing." Michael's face drained of color. "Mom, we were just trying to help." "No," I said firmly. "You were trying to control me. Legally, financially, physically. And when I didn't cooperate, Jessica tried to poison me." Jessica laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's insane." "Is it?" I asked, reaching into a drawer and pulling out a folder. I opened it slowly and slid it across the table. Inside, Patricia's report, the debt, the life insurance policy, the payments to Dr. Steinberg. Jessica's hand went limp. Michael looked like someone had punched the air out of him. "I know about the refinancing, the credit cards, the boutique shop in debt. I know about the insurance policy you took out on me without my knowledge." Jessica tried to speak, but I raised a hand. "I know about the champagne glass, the poison, the exact glass I use at every party." Michael looked down at the floor. He didn't deny it, because he couldn't. That's when the knock came, right on cue. 2 police officers stepped through my doorway, led by Detective Lisa Morrison, the same officer who had reviewed Helen's toxicology report. "Mrs. Hartwell?" the detective said, addressing Jessica. Jessica turned white. "We have some questions about a medical incident that occurred during a party at this residence. Would you be willing to come with us?" Michael stepped forward. "She didn't do anything." Detective Morrison held up a hand. "We've obtained the toxicology report from the hospital. It shows that the champagne served that night contained a highly toxic compound consistent with oleander extract." Jessica took a step back. It must have been a mistake. I don't know how." Detective Morrison continued. "We also have surveillance from a neighbor's Ring camera showing you standing near the drinks table before the incident, handling what appears to be a small glass vial." Jessica stared at me in horror. "You planned this?" I met her gaze, steady and cold. "No, you planned it. I just paid attention." They read her rights. Michael watched, silent as they handcuffed his wife. And then she turned on him. "You said it would be clean," she screamed. "You said if she drank it, no one would ask questions. You said her age would cover everything." Michael looked like he'd been shot. "I didn't mean poison," he stammered. "You never said poison." Jessica was still shouting as they led her outside, and just like that, their partnership of deception unraveled right there on my front porch. Michael remained behind, his hands trembling. "I swear, Mom," he said, "I didn't know." "Not really. She said it was just something to help you sleep. just to scare you into moving." He trailed off. I didn't know what else to do." I nodded slowly. "Then maybe you should have just asked for help." "Not tried to steal it." He buried his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry." I said nothing, because in that moment, there was nothing left to say. When the verdicts came in, the courtroom was impossibly silent. I sat quietly in a sea of official-looking chairs, the weight of anticipation pressing on my shoulders. I had years of legal battles behind me, boardroom showdowns, contract disputes, but nothing compared to this. This was family. When the judge spoke Jessica's sentence 15 years for attempted murder, the words hung in the air like a verdict on my own heart. I watched her shoulders slump, tears mixing with mascara as she listened, not to the judge, not even to her own defense, but to the echo of her own choices collapsing around her. Michael sat beside her, his face pale as the parchment on the judge's bench. 3 years for conspiracy. He'd pleaded guilty to lesser charges in a bid to reduce sentencing, but nothing could reduce the betrayal. Outside the courthouse, the press cameras clicked incessantly. Flashbulbs flashed, reporters shouted questions, but I moved through the crowd like a shadow, calm, composed. Because the real justice wasn't the prison time, it wasn't the headlines, it was the relief that swept through me like sunlight after a storm, and the ironclad assurance that I was safe. 2 weeks later, I visited Helen. She was recovering, waking up from sedation with faint, confused memories. When she saw me, her hand trembled as she reached for mine. "Sarah, thank goodness," she whispered, eyes swimming with tears and gratitude. "I remember that glass. I thought I saw Jessica." Her voice faded, chewing on what she'd almost remembered. "That's okay," I said gently. "I've got it all figured out now." She nodded slowly. It felt like coming home to compassion, to sisterhood, to having someone by your side who saw the danger, believed you, and helped you survive. Emma, my precious granddaughter, came by one afternoon. She hugged me tight. "Grandma," she said, voice soft, "I'm so proud of you for being brave, for protecting everyone." Her eyes were full of questions, grief, betrayal, but also admiration. We talked for hours after, about honesty, integrity, and how sometimes the people you love most can show you the worst in themselves, but how surviving that teaches you something about your own strength. With the family drama behind me, I focused on rebuilding. The house felt different, not haunted, but guarded, protected. I installed new cameras, but they were reminders, not cages. I paid the security team, but not out of fear, out of wisdom. I also began working again, lighter, on my terms. I volunteered at a local nonprofit for elder rights, speaking to audiences about family exploitation, legal empowerment, and how to protect one's legacy. People listened. They asked questions. Some cried. Some nodded knowingly. I realized how many stories like mine were hidden behind closed doors, stories where elderly parents were pressured, manipulated, or erased quietly for their assets. I chose to transform my story into a cautionary tale. One evening, I received a letter from Sunset Manor. Their unit was offered to someone else. I smiled, not from regret, from vindication, because what they thought would be their golden ticket was just the beginning of their downfall. Months later, the insurance company finalized their decision. Jessica's policy was voided because of her conviction. All premiums refunded, and I didn't ask for a cent more. Justice had been served. A year from that fateful party, I sat in my garden watching roses bloom, the same roses my late husband planted. They were more beautiful than I remembered. Maybe because I'd rediscovered what they symbolized: growth, resilience, and the beauty that remains even after winter. Emma graduated high school that spring. She'd been accepted to Northwestern pre-law just like I had suggested. Her call came through tears. "Grandma, I made it." And I told her what I told you now. Strength does not come from being unbroken. It comes from learning how to stand firm after pieces of your foundation have been shaken. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. Not just for listening, but for understanding that stories like this matter. If you or someone you know is facing betrayal, manipulation, or abuse, especially from family, know this: you are not helpless. You are not alone. Help exists. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is fight. Some people think turning 70 means you're slowing down, but what they don't realize is with age comes clarity and strength and an unshakable fire to protect everything you've built. Jessica and Michael thought they were taking control of my life. Instead, I took back every ounce of power they tried to steal, legally, emotionally, and spiritually. Justice wasn't just served in court. It was served in every decision I made after. If this story made you feel angry at how easily people betray trust, or hopeful that strength can bloom even at your lowest, then share it. Because someone out there needs to be reminded that they are not powerless, no matter their age, status, or circumstances. Drop a comment below if you've ever faced betrayal and what it taught you about yourself. Don't forget to subscribe because more stories like this are coming. Stories that heal, that confront, that change lives. Until then, stay sharp, stay kind, and never, ever let anyone silence your strength.